The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. Well, October is Autism Awareness Month, so I want to do an autism awareness video. I've told you before I'm an ASPE. I don't view myself being an ASPE as like a disorder per se. I mean, this is how I grew up. This is what made me who I am. I mean, who you see today is the result of me growing up, experiencing everything through the lens of what they call an autism spectrum disorder. But I like who I am. I'm okay with myself. I don't see myself as broken or damaged or anything like that. So I don't consider me being an ASPE as being a problem per se. However, I do consider the sensory processing part of it to be problematic, as in that it interferes with my ability to do things, to function, you know, sometimes to the point where I can't do what I want. So that is a problem sometimes. Okay, so this video is about sensory processing, and I have a list here so I don't ramble too much. So I want to talk about sensory overload. I had seen an article a while back about how sensory processing in people with ASDs is more bottom up than top down. Now this makes total sense to me. I think they really hit on something here. Top down would be seeing the big picture and then going to the details. Bottom up would be seeing the details and then creating the big picture. And you know, and again, this is my perspective, so maybe other people will disagree. But, well, I'll speak for myself, that I do tend to see the details probably a lot more than most people, and I think I process via the details. I'm also very, very sensitive to all sensory input. So when you're extremely sensitive and you're processing all the details, you know, it can get overwhelming. Okay, the next thing I want to bring up is routine seeking. People talk about ASPEs and autistics as, you know, having this weird thing for routine. Well, I tell you that I think that there's very good reason why we have this thing for routine, and I think that has to do with the processing, the bottom up, that we're in the details, not so efficient with the big picture. I'll tell you, when I'm in my own home, where I'm very familiar with everything, I feel a lot more at ease, and I think that part of that is simply because it's easier for my brain to process, because I'm not taking in tons of new information and, you know, crunching through all this data like a computer. The same goes for routines, that it makes getting through sequential tasks a lot easier. I think basically routines and familiarity are a lot easier on the brain, especially the ASPE or autistic brain. And the other reason for this, the third point here, is the shifting. Again, speaking from my own experience, I think that we shift more slowly and with more difficulty. I'll give you a few examples. Okay, one is, let's say you had to find something in a competing background. Like you had to find an object among many, maybe in a drawer. If you process more bottom up and you shift more slowly, that's going to be a lot more difficult. Like extremely stressful. Okay, another thing is ASPEs tend to be very, very focused. And so let's say you're working on something. I mean, it could be anything. You could be trying to, you know, fry up some eggs, or, you know, make your bed, or get dressed, or whatever you're working on. And something else comes and requires you to shift your attention. It's very difficult. So somebody might talk to you and you might not hear them, or you might hear them, but it's almost like you're hearing it like you're underwater because you're so intensely focused. And you hear this and it's like it requires a physical, conscious effort with a force of will to shift yourself over, because it's very uncomfortable. It just doesn't happen easily. So then people accuse you of ignoring them, but really it's just that your shifting was difficult. Sequential tasks, anything where you have to do a number of steps in a row, requires a constant shifting of focus. So in my experience, it's much better to have them as a tight routine. I guess with it being very routine, it takes some of the burden off this. You kind of can go more on autopilot. Otherwise, it just becomes really uncomfortable and stressful. Shifting topics. So let's say you're having a conversation with someone and you're talking about one thing, and then the person tries to shift the topic. Well, if you have a brain that doesn't shift very quickly, to them it might look like you're stuck on that topic. Why are you bringing that back? Why can't you just let it go and move on? Well, it's just the way your brain is. I guess with more effort and better skills and coaching, you say, okay, they're shifting the topic. Yeah, you have to shift now, and make more of an effort. But it doesn't come naturally. It's not easy. But it's kind of something you have to learn to do. It's more of a social skill. Shifting ideas. Now, let's say you have plans for the day and your plans don't work out. Now, some people can deal with this pretty well. Oh, well, let's just go do this instead. However, from my experience as being an ASP, it's not so easy. I try.
You're gonna get us in trouble. We can't do that.
I mean, I try, but sometimes I just feel after very, very disturbed and uncomfortable.
I want it.
But it's closed, Gunnar.
I want it.
And how could I forget
And you love marbles.
shifting
You wanna go to
locations,
Comic-Con?
as in going from one place to the other, leaving the house?
Are you nervous?
That can be pretty stressful.
Gunnar. Don't you want to go? Yes? Okay, great.
Okay, now, the other thing is the sensory overload. It comes in stages, I find. First of all, there's what is called the partial shutdown, I recently learned. Now, when I'm in the house, I feel like pretty much a normal person, and then when I step outside, I pretty quickly feel like I'm going into some kind of altered state. It's hard to describe the state. You feel a bit disconnected and overwhelmed. Just a kind of distant, weird feeling. It's not like things aren't real, but it's like I don't know, it's hard to describe, but pretty much I always feel like that once I go out. I think it's just because there's a lot of input coming in, and with the bottom-up processing and the shifting, it doesn't process efficiently. It's maybe overwhelming, but I think that my brain develops this as a way to protect me from getting totally overloaded. So that's the partial shutdown. You can walk around in a partial shutdown for, all the time, and other people probably wouldn't really notice because you can function and just keep going. But you notice. And then when you come home and you're in your familiar environment, or you go somewhere else you're very familiar, then you're less likely to have that feeling. But it's mostly with the input and the different stuff going on. That's when I feel it. Okay, stage 2 is what I call drunk again. Again, this is my experience, but I find that in an encroaching meltdown or overload, one thing that happens is you start to lose your executive function. So it's like you might just become kind of hyper, or you might revert to talking about your special interests, like as a default, like you can't go anywhere else. You find, I'm talking about it again. Or maybe just hyper, or sometimes overly emotional. Like I got a bad sensory overload when I went shopping a while ago. Went to a perfume store, and as soon as I smelled the perfume, I just burst out into tears. I was so embarrassed. But it's like you can't regulate yourself well. That's why I call it being drunk again. Okay, stage 3, I would say, is discomfort. Physical discomfort. As in, I'll go to a coffee shop, and I like people, so I want to go in there and talk to whoever it is and have fun, and maybe they're funny, and that's great. But that doesn't change the fact that I process this way, so all the stuff in the background is coming in. And at a certain point, usually after about 20 minutes, it starts to sound really loud, and I'll start to feel physically uncomfortable. I mean, this could happen from a lot of things, like sifting through DVDs that have not been put in order at the library, or music in the background, or something touching me or whatever. I start to feel like really uncomfortable in my arms and like under my skin. Basically, like in my whole body. Like I want to jump out of my body. What you might see at this stage is a lot of sensory seeking and stimming. I feel like I can't really quite control my body. Like you can't control yourself well, because you're actually just physically really uncomfortable. I find at this stage I also kind of lose my filter between what goes on in my head versus what comes out of my mouth, as in, I'll just blurt stuff out. It's almost like having Tourette's. Sometimes I'll blurt out swear words. Sometimes I'll just blurt out whatever it is that is really bothering me, or I'll talk myself through a task. I'll be like going through the supermarket, talking in a weird voice, and if my son is there, it's actually really good because then people just think I'm doing it for him. Or if I'm talking myself through the task, but I'm on the phone with my husband, people will just think that I'm, talking on the phone, and not that I'm crazy, because I know I'm doing it, but I can't help it. So I have a couple things that I'll do to try to, let's sort of hide it. Sometimes I'll be somewhere and I have a task to do, but I'm starting to go into overload, and there'll be a noise in the background, like a fridge or something, and it's like that noise completely sucks me in, and I feel like I'm frozen. I'll just stand there listening to this noise, like locked into it. Sometimes I'll be standing there and I'll be doing this, just listening to that hum, and I just feel like I'm, and it's hard to like break out of it. But I mean, as an adult, I'll be like, I'll stand there and do that for a few minutes, and I'll be like, okay, get it together, and then I'll talk myself through the task. I would recommend trying to avoid getting to that point. Don't try to push through it, because I think it takes a toll on you. So if I start feeling that coming on, I've learned to say to myself, okay, you're getting spun, you need to get out. Or you have a need that you haven't met. Sometimes it's because there's some sensory input, but also I'm hungry, but I don't realize it, and I'll be like, maybe I'm hungry, or maybe I'm thirsty. It's not always obvious. Or maybe it's my clothes, or I'm hot, or it's this bag on my shoulder. Like, all this stuff, like, it adds to the input. It adds to the overload, and you have to remove yourself from whatever's overloading you and meet your physical needs until you feel okay again, and you don't feel like you're gonna jump out of your skin. But you got to avoid getting to that point, because otherwise you might get to the next point, which is the breakdown, which I call the robot breaking down. At this point, I think you've lost your executive function, although you may still have what I call the higher self, the little voice that says, you're losing it, but you're physically not really able to act normal, let's say. It doesn't mean you're going to go and hurt anyone, because you don't have any desire to. It's just you might not be able to control your movements. You feel terrible, certainly can't make any decisions or deal with anything. It's very hard. I just get this picture of a robot in my head that's like, when the parts come off and the springs are like coming out, and the robot's like, like hitting himself into a wall. It's sort of like that. I mean, you kind of know you're losing it. You got to get yourself away. You don't want to get to that point. I've spent my life mastering not getting to that point. Well, I haven't quite mastered it, but it's better. It's rare that I get to that point, but it can still happen. And then the last stage is the shutdown. Now, you might not go into meltdown, you might go into a shutdown, where you really just can't interact or say anything, or really even think or make any kind of decision or anything. Or you might have the meltdown and then find that you're having a shutdown. Or you might get to like the stage where you're drunk again and starting to like move all funny and feel really uncomfortable, but you don't have a meltdown. But you get home, you think you're going to be okay, but then the next 2 or 3 days you're like in a total shutdown, and like your brain doesn't work. You guys know me from YouTube. You probably think that, no, you can't really be dealing with something like that, but actually, yeah. So you know me, I'm pretty, okay person, but I totally have a sensory processing disorder, let's just say. So, I wanted to raise awareness about this, and one of the things I want to say is, if you have a kid who has this, if they're starting to do all that kind of weird stuff, and they're getting really irrational, there's a good chance that they're having overload, and don't try to push them through it. I don't find that it gets better over time. I don't have more stamina over time for it. I just have better coping strategies to avoid getting to that point. Don't push the poor kids through it, because they're so uncomfortable and miserable. And when they do this and like block their ears, like they're not trying to be rude. I do this all the time. All the time. Because this ear is so sensitive that it'll crackle and it'll hurt, and then I won't be able to talk sometimes, because I can't even my own voice hurts. I can't listen to anyone. My son's voice, I just it sets it off. So I don't think that this is a bad thing to do, or a lot of that behavior, it's not intentional. It's not because your kid's being rude or they're trying to give you a hard time or screw up your day. And I don't have all the answers. I have a son who's also on the spectrum, and you would think that I knew everything about how to handle him, and I don't. You know, and he's different than I am in a lot of ways, in some ways the same, and I don't have all the answers. But maybe if I tell you my experience, maybe it'll help you understand a little bit better what that aspect of it is like. And maybe they'll do some good in the world. I don't know. I hope so. Anyway, thanks for listening to me, and thanks for giving me a thumbs up. And thanks for leaving me your comments, and I'll see you next time.